So we're going to be taking a look at some vocabulary that's related to our Lightroom application, just so that we're all in the same kind of terminology, so that we can kind of speak the same language, right? So the first word that I want us to take a look at is enhance. We're also going to be looking at the word selective. We're going to be looking at the word saturation. We're going to be looking at the word gradient. And then the final word we'll be looking at is vignette. So just depending on which group, our groups and our numbers, look at the website, double check which one you're going to be doing of those 5 words, and then do a reply to the videos that are there for your given word. All right, look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about those words. All right, so let's take a quick look at how we're going to do some of this enhancement inside of Lightroom in the mobile app. So I'm just going to click on Lightroom here, and here's our camera roll. So anything that we've shot either with Lightroom itself, or if you've synced them up from your other camera roll, then the photos will be available here. So I'm just going to click on this photo here. And this was something that I shot the other day when we were looking at how to read a room and using the reflectors. And I've already gone ahead and enhanced. So this is kind of what we're going to be going for. And you can see if I hold this down by clicking, that's the original photo, and that's the enhanced photo, right? So original, enhanced. So I'm going to go over here. I'm just going to go ahead and reset so that we can start to see, well, what kind of edits did we do? So we'll reset all adjustments. All right, so now we're back to kind of our original photo. So there's kind of a whole line of things down here. Now, let's start with just kind of some of our basic edits. So there's a little line right here next to profiles, and that's where you get to just like the general enhancements, right? So, if I wanted to look and see, is there any, do I need to make it a little brighter or a little bit darker? Those are just kind of that overall adjustment that I could make there. Once I've adjusted it, I've also got options, things like highlights or shadows. So I might want to make, the shadows a little lighter or a little bit darker. The highlights maybe are a little bit too bright. I could kind of bring those down to kind of even things out. And so we can kind of play with those until it starts to look about the way that we think the overall picture should. Now, color, is going to give us the ability to start to shift the color rate. So I can warm it up a little bit. I can make it feel much cooler. Kind of depends on the effect that we're going for, right? So I'm just going to give it just a tiny bit of warmth. There we go. If I don't like any of these changes, let's say I bring that up too far, I can also just double tap, and then that resets it to 0. Most photographs that are digital also could use a little bit of sharpness. So I'm just going into details here, and I'm going to give it a little bit of sharpness just to give it a little bit more kind of detail in some of these areas. The other thing we can often use as well, if we go to optics, so down here at the bottom, this optics, if you do enable lens correction, that usually will shift. Again, I'll turn that off. It kind of just changes the way. There's usually a little bit of distortion in the lens, so it kind of flattens that out just a little bit. Other things we might want to look at, so I'll usually go into the effects area, and there's a couple of things in there that we might want to look at. I'm going to give it a vignette. So if you go towards the right-hand side, it's going to make it whiter, right? Or if you go to the other side, it's going to make it darker, right? So I usually will give it a little bit. Again, if we're trying to concentrate our attention on that main subject, oftentimes bringing down some of those brightest areas, especially out in here, will help kind of focus the eye, just like framing, towards that main subject. So there's my effects. Other things we may want to do in there, clarity. So clarity is kind of like a sharpness, although it has a little bit of texture to it. So we might want to bring that up or down. So there it's really soft. There it's, a little more grungy, depending on the effect that we're going to go for. I'm going to actually, for now, leave that alone. We're going to look at some selective things we can do, and we'll look at clarity in those. So those are some of our general settings. And again, if we look at those, that's what we started off at. And then there's our beginning to be enhanced photo. Now, before we left, we already talked about those sort of things in the Lightroom desktop version. So what I want to look at now is doing some things that are a little more selective. So not just an overall to the picture, but very specific. So if we come back in here and we go back into these first ones, the first two here are selective and healing. And so we're going to look at kind of both of those. So with selective, if I click on that, the first thing that I'm going to need to do is I need to tell it, well, where do I want this selective change to happen? So the first thing I have to do is click on the plus sign up here at the top, and then it gives me three options. So if I want a brush, a selective brush where I can just apply something to one area, I'm going to use that first left option. So I'm going to click there. Now I've got the selective brush, and I've got either a kind of a smaller hard-edged brush or a softer brush. So I'm going to use this softer brush because I think it's going to give me a little more blending. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to do a little bit of work on like the brightness of my face, but I don't want everything brighter. So I might want to just kind of paint in that one area. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one finger and I'm going to start to just lightly paint, and it's going to give me a little bit of like a reddish color, which is the quick mask. So it's just showing me where is that adjustment going to happen. Now, if I go too far, let's say I go out here and I go, oh gosh, I don't want that part over there. I can just switch to the little, the eraser here. So I can just click right below it, erase, and then I can just take this part and bring it back down so that I don't hit those areas that I don't want to get. Like maybe I don't want the mustache, you know, or this top cheek part. So I can kind of control that, you know, just by painting around the edges. So now I've got this defined area. So then I've got all my choices down here at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and start with light. And I'm just going to decide that I want this face, just the face part, to be a little bit brighter, but I don't want those highlights to get too high, a little bit too hot. So I might come over here and say, well, highlights I'm going to bring down just a little bit. I might take the whites down just a tiny bit. And then I might want to do like the blacks to give it a little more contrast, or, you know, bring down those shadows a little bit. So I can do, and everything that I'm doing, it's only doing that one area. Okay. I might want to do another selective area. So I'm going to actually take the beard area here and I'm going to give it some more detail, some more clarity inside of there. So I'm going to hit the plus sign. And again, I'm going to use the selective brush, and I'm going to use the soft one. Oops. So let's delete that one. All right. So plus selective brush. All right. So then I'm going to paint in this area. So I'm just going to go right over here and just pretty much get the beard. And it doesn't have to be perfect in this case. Just get these little, all this hair, you know, which has all that detail. And again, if I make a mistake, I can always erase a little bit on this outside edge. I can bring this part down, you know, feather that edge just a little bit. Okay, so now I've got that part selected. So then I'm going to go into detail, and I'm going to bring up the sharpness maybe a little bit, and then I'm going to go to effect. I'm going to take clarity, and I'm going to go ahead and bring that up as well. See how you can see how it goes really soft focus there, and much more detail and texture in there. So I'm just going to bring that up a little bit. And then since I'm still in that area, it did go a little bit darker, so I'm going to take those in the light area. I'm going to take those shadows and maybe open those back up just a little bit so that it doesn't lose too much inside of there. So there's that selection. Another thing that I may want to do is just to smooth the skin just a little bit. So I might decide to go, okay, plus and selective and the brush. And I'm going to go ahead and just, again, do this area, but I'm going to try to avoid the eyes because usually we want the eyes to be sharp. So I'm just going to take that out just a little bit. There we go. And then, so if I wanted to, I could come into the effects and I could take this clarity and actually bring that down just a little bit. And what it does is a little, like some of that blotchiness, you know, or unevenness in the skin, it may smooth out just a little bit. And it doesn't need, I don't want a lot. I don't want to look like, you know, like it's some sort of Snapchat filter. But just maybe a tiny bit just to kind of ease some of that will be enough to just give it a little bit. All right, so once I'm happy with those, I can just hit the check mark down here at the bottom, and then those are applied. So we can see, yeah, that's what it looked like before. Here's our enhancement there, before, after. All right, So that's a selective one. The healing brush, what it's going to do is it's going to remove and fix little areas. So if we had a blemish or something like that. So I'm going to take 5 years, 10 years off of my face, and I'm just going to take out these couple of wrinkles, and they're very minor, but this is just to show you how it's done. So I'm on the healing brush. Now there's two types of brushes in here. There's a healing brush and there's a clone tool. So for right now, let's just work with healing. It's a little bit easier to deal with. And so again, I'm going to do a soft brush, and I'm actually going to zoom in. So I'm going to do a little pinch. I'm going to go whoop. And then if I need to drag it, again, use 2 fingers because one is going to start to paint. So if I use 2 fingers, I can then reposition. And then I'm just going to take this brush. I'm just going to go right across this forehead part right there. And then I'm going to also do another one right here. And maybe another little one right there. And then if I wanted to, I could also do just right below the eye. So I could go right here. And then maybe I can reposition it so I can decide, okay, well, where's that spot the best place to go from? If I need to move the screen again, I'm going to use 2 fingers. I can come over here just a little bit. Reposition that. All right. Once I say okay, so you can see it's now gone and smoothed out all of those, the little bit of wrinkles that were on there. And so again, there's before and after. All right, so a couple of other things that we can do. If we go into our selective, now there were 3 types of the plus sign, right? And we just used the brush. So another thing that we could do is we've got a radial gradient and we've also got a linear gradient. So I'm going to use the linear gradient currently. And what you're going to do is you click and drag from like, well, in this case, an edge. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to drag this down a little bit. So this red transition, this is going to be 100% of that value, and this is going to be none of it, right? So there's this gradient or this transition through here. And I'm going to do a color gradient. So I'm going to give it some warmth on this side. So I'm going to bring like the yellows way up, maybe in a little bit of red. And I could also make it lighter or darker. So I could decide, do I want it a little bit brighter or darker in that corner, as it starts to bring in that warmth. And then, see, I could stretch that down a little bit if I wanted to. So it brings in some of that warmth there. And then I'm going to add another one. I'm going to do kind of like a warm, cool effect. So I'm just going to drag this in from this way, bring in some cool from over on that side. So again, I'm going to take the temperature and bring that down. So I get a little warmth on this side and a little cool on that side. Okay, we can see our difference there. So we got some warmth and some cool. There we go. Now this spot right here looks really kind of bright to me. There's a couple of these little patches on the flannel that kind of are sticking out to me, which are a little bit drawing attention because they're so bright. So I'm just going to go in, maybe let's go selective one more time. Let's just do a quick brush for that. So I'm just going to paint a little bit of red there, maybe a little bit here, a little bit on this one and this one. Okay, and then with those, then I'm going to go into light. And because it's the brightest areas, what I want to do is actually, I'm just going to take the highlights down a little bit, like you can see the difference there. So I'm just going to bring down those highlights a little bit. I'll go to the whites as well. Maybe I can bring those down just a little bit as well. And then check mark. So that way these areas just aren't quite so bright. They're not quite pulling for so much attention, which again is a little bit distracting. And again, with a portrait, what we're trying to do is focus the attention on the subject, right? So we want them to be looking at the person's face, not at some of these other elements, right? So there's our before, there's our after. Let's see, is there anything else we need to do or didn't talk about? At this point, I might want to just maybe increase this vignette just a tiny bit now that we've got the other warm and cool stuff going. Bring that down. I think one other thing that I did last time. So sometimes we do want to contour the face a little bit. So if we wanted to do that, we could go into selective. And I'm just going to take another selection brush. And I'm just going to paint just a little bit right along the edge here. So I'm just going to take a little edge here and a little edge here. Oops, wrong one. So basically, I'm just going to create just a little bit of shadow along the edge of that. That'll, again, give us some form. It's kind of like putting a black reflector on there. So I'm going to do that through light, and I'm going to take the exposure and just bring it down a little bit so we can see, you know, there's brighter, there's darker, right? So we don't need a lot, but we just want maybe just a tiny bit that just will kind of bring down those edges of the face just a little bit, just to give it a little more contouring so that the front part of the face stands out a little bit more. I can do that probably with shadows a little bit as well. I can either open up or darken those shadows. So I can just bring that a little bit. There we go. So again, there's where we started. There's where we're at. So lots of things that we can do inside of that Lightroom mobile application. So just kind of play around, explore. You've been shooting lots of portraits with your reflectors and things. So pick a couple of your favorites. Let's say maybe 3 of your favorite ones from different shoots. Maybe one's from the, you know, the dream job or something like that. And kind of play around with it, see what you can do. You don't have to use every single thing on it. Doesn't need to be crazy, but you know, we should see definitely a difference when you post the two between your before and your after. All right, have fun.